Severe. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Good to see so many people here. I think just about everybody has shown rather greater foresight than I did about the size of the room and come equipped accordingly. It's pretty chilly, which hopefully will encourage everyone to be concise and we stick to time. So. But anyway, welcome, and I think a special vote of thanks to Councillor Harrison, Angela, for the mince pies, which of course very much in the spirit of public health and all the rest of it, so thank you very much for that. Right, moving on, in terms of apologies, I've got those from Alan Jarrett, and Councillor Brake is in Alan's usual place as the senior elected member representative from Medway, Neil Dixon, Anne Taylor, Lee Farrock, and I've got a local medical committee representative as well. Is there anybody else in terms of any apologies that we have? Nope. Okay. Thank you. I think, again, as we've said before, I think I've said this at previous meetings, there's no need, I think, to do the round of introductions. We largely know each other. But perhaps you may wish to identify, I suggest you do identify yourself when you speak. Can I also add, actually, I can see on the call, I've got Des Holden and Jackie Cressati. Is Paul Bartlett, there he is, yeah, absolutely. So I had those three down as virtual attendees. Welcome to you as well. Right, quorum, yes, I think we can. Looking around, I think we can safely state that we're quorate. Declarations of interest, are there any? We've not been informed of any. We have 4 pending returns for declarations of interest, but do we have any items, any interest to be declared for the purposes of today's meeting? Nope. Okay. Good. Right. Minutes of the previous meeting. Are members of the board content that this is a fair and accurate record? Any further queries, amendments? No, so we can take those as a correct record. Thank you. And in terms of the action log, I think all those are basically recorded as recommended to close. So unless there is anyone wishes to raise on any of those items, then we've pretty much made up time and we can move straight on to our first, in fact we're remarkably ahead of time, sorry, our first substantive item, which is the integrated care strategy, the development of that, which clearly is a key point, and I presume, hand over straight to Vincent to take us through where we are and what we're being asked to do.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. I'm Vincent Perdue. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for NHS Kent and Medway Integrated Care Board. Really pleased to present the first interim integrated care strategy. This is a joint piece of work across the Integrated Care Partnership. So alongside NHS Kent and Medway, Kent County Council and Medway Council, colleagues have been leading on the development of this document. As we've updated the joint committee before, this is the interim strategy that's being put forward for approval. It's a document that is going through the governance of our various organisations. It's been considered by the Medway Health and Adult Social Care Committee and also the Kent County Council Cabinet, and will be going, has already been considered as well by the Integrated Care Board. It is the first interim strategy that we're putting forward, so it is a document that we are building on and will continue to build on through 2023. It sets out our ambitions and our vision for the integrated care system across Kent and Medway, really building on the work that we've done in analysing the joint strategic needs assessments across our communities and our populations, but really taking a focus on how we can work together to address the wider determinants of health and to reduce health inequalities across our populations. I want to just be really clear that this is the first draft of the, or first interim version of the strategy, because actually we know in the time that we've had available, it hasn't been possible to do the level of engagement that we would want to do across all of our stakeholders across Kent and Medway. And so the important thing for us here is that from January onwards, we will build the work that we need to do to engage with our health and care partnerships and wider stakeholders across the system to ensure that actually we can translate the ambitions into really clear objectives to be delivered in our places. And I'm emphasising places because we know that the populations across Kent and Medway are different, and so it's important that we're able to look at the needs in the different areas across Kent and Medway and prioritise the areas that we want to focus on with a relevant sense of the needs in those areas. I want to just say to the committee that we have engaged quite closely with partners across the system in developing the strategy to ensure that actually there are opportunities to feed people's comments in around the draft strategy, but also to think about how we build on those comments as we develop the strategy further. And we've had opportunity following comments from this committee to work with the leaders or the chief executives of our districts and boroughs where we've had 2 engagement opportunities, but also that we've shared the draft of the strategy for comments, and the comments have all been captured. The comments of this committee have been captured as well on the initial draft, and we'll continue to work on those comments as we iterate the document and develop the final version of the strategy towards the autumn of 2023. So at this point, I can certainly add that we've considered it in NHS Kent and Medway, noted that it is the interim strategy, noted that it's a piece of work in progress that we want to develop further, and recognise that there is more work we need to do to ensure that actually we're comfortable that this is a strategy that really can drive the delivery of integrated care across Kent and Medway in a much more robust way. And so I want to just give the opportunity to my colleagues, James Williams and Andrew Ngosh, who are Directors of Public Health, who've worked alongside me on this, to add any comments from their perspective before we open it up to the committee for discussion.
Yeah, I'll come certainly to you, James. Anjan had indicated that he was going to be joining us a few minutes late. He's just arrived, so I think we'll certainly give him a chance to gather breath and go to James first.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Vincent. Nothing too much further to add to Vincent's comments other than the process. So in terms of Medway, as we're aware, it went through the Health Adult Social Care Committee, was reviewed, and the comments fed into Vincent and the team as he set out. The one thing that I would flag, though, is we've got an opportunity now that people are aware of the content of the strategy. Now we've got this interim process to really build on that next phase, which is the full engagement for us to review and revise the final document by next September, which is, I think, our timeline in terms of that. Some of the comments that just to reflect on children's issues, again, children and young people, a lot of stakeholders have fed back that we need to make sure that we take account of their needs, specifically in terms of developing our strategy and the action plans for those. And then the other element that was flagged to me is around women's health. And we know particularly in terms of some of the reports, report from the CMO this year about women's health again as we move forward and develop the final sort of, it won't be final because it'll be an ongoing process, I would suggest, but the final version of our strategy for Kent and Medway that we take account of women's health needs. And then my final point, I think, is that this strategy does link into the wider determinants. There is a real clear acknowledgement that the issues that we're facing here across Kent and Medway are not clinical solely, and that we have to do the broader work, link in, do the early intervention and prevention work at place level in order to deliver the aspirations that we've set out.
Thank you very much, James. Anjan, if you want to add anything.
Not much more to add. I think everything has been said. But I'll just say this much, that strategy is just a strategy, however good it might be. The main part of it, which will make it real, is the actions that we take, what actually we do from it. So there's a big piece of work which is planned for from January to March, really, to do that engagement piece and develop the action plans jointly with colleagues here, as well as with the public health teams, to really work on the district level as well as the HCP level action plans that we can actually make real. Thank you.
Thank you, yeah, and I would reiterate the point about the interim nature of this. So, for instance, in my council, in Kent County Council, we considered it, as Vincent mentioned, in Cabinet last week, but we still have it's still to come to our County Council next week. So we have a meeting in a week's time, and I think it's very important that I don't think the County Council will be very amused if they think they are simply signing off on something which is already a done deal. Now, of course, in terms of the interim, in effect it is and will be by that stage, but actually it's iterative, and the really important thing is that we take account at every stage, including, for example, if I take my own example, that County Council debate, of the feedback that we get, and same with partners across the partnership. Right, I did see actually the first hand I've seen was Paul Bartlett, who's joining us, who's with us remotely. So, Paul, if I come to you, and I'll look round for anyone else who is wishing to contribute.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you for the work that's been done on this report. I think it is extraordinary the amount of effort that has gone into this in such a short period of time. I've got two comments. They're both linked, and I think we need to make the case for additional capital investment into the health service in Kent and Medway. And there are two specific items that I think we should include in this and therefore make our case for. First of all, slide 26. The recent Kirkup report made it clear that a new obstetric theatre is required at the QEQM. That and the other capital expenditure totals £24 million. And on slide 40, I think we should make the point that the East Kent transformation and funding for that has been, I think you might be generous and describe it as glacial. We've been working on that since 2015, and I think it's time that we use this opportunity to put pressure on the centre to deliver those two important capital expenditure schemes. If this group or this committee doesn't do that, then who will? So, Chairman, I'd like you to have consideration for including those two references in the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. What I'll do is take a batch of three. So I have seen John Goulston, I've seen Shane. I will come to you in a moment, but let's just take those three, come back to Vincent and colleagues, then take another three. John.
Thank you very much, Roger. Just a couple of points. So thanks everyone again for the work that's gone to get this to where it is today. I think in the next stage, and as part of the engagement, it'd be really helpful on the 6 outcomes to actually understand, in effect, define the ambition, because they're great statements, but actually in 5 years' time, what will be better for young people, except children, young people, older people, except people with long-term conditions, etc. What will it look? What do we envisage things will look like in comparison with today from their point of view? So, what does success look like for our people's point of view. So I think defining that. I think secondly, 5 years strategies are a long, it's a long-term period. So within that, for each of the outcomes, it would be good to understand what's the priority in the next couple of years for each of those 6 outcomes. What do we really want to motor on in the short term, and what do people think about that? And then I just think a couple of solutions that don't really feature strongly. One is integrated neighbourhood teams, which we're talking, as the chair of West Kent HCP, it's a big thing that we want to start on, and I'm sure the other HCPs will embark on it as well. Because I think actually in terms of prevention, in terms of helping with the demand on emergency care, there's a whole raft of things that if we can get dealing with the GP shortage, as it were, on the workforce side, there's a load of things that we can hopefully work in a different way and hopefully have better outcomes for our population with if we can get integrated neighbourhood teams to work properly. And the second one, I think, is an intermediate care strategy. We don't, for intermediate care, that middle bit is something that we've never had across health. We had one 30 years ago and it sort of disappeared. But I think in terms of keeping the out-of-hospital work, if you like, evolving into something that's really going to make a difference, actually make a difference to the problems that we've got today in terms of the demand for urgent emergency care. The ICS, I believe, Paul, is now one of 12 national pilots to establish a new integrated, intermediate care strategy, and I think that could unlock a lot of the problems that we have and achieve quite a lot against these outcomes.
Thank you very much. And Shane, and then I'll take some responses to those points and then come for any further questions.
Thank you, Chair, for that. Unfortunately, I'm not going to join the backslapping here, as you, I'm sure, wouldn't expect me to. The whole point of this partnership is it's got to be based on trust, and trust doesn't start with tokenism. To have this sent out to us on a Wednesday for comments by a Monday, and then for virtually the same document to be agreed 2 days later isn't a great start to a partnership, to be fair. There are so many things that are missing from this, and I get it's supposed to be a high-level document and we're going to go out again to ask people, but some of the solutions, some of the suggestions in here are not clear, are missing. The solution, the main solution, our key goal, according to this, will be data, population health management. That was going to be the key solution. I almost want to break out the fireworks now. If that is really it, then I think this has not had the best of starts. There's not a lot clear here. To be fair, I think the answer seems to be a lot of data and dashboards and scorecards, and because that's what's going to do it, of course, when actually it's some of the fundamental stuff, some of the place stuff, access to health services, for example, and we're not just talking hospitals, which seems to be one of the key things. We're talking doctors, GPs, nurses, access to healthcare as and when people need it at an early possible stage. Some glaring omissions, like nothing in here about listening and engaging our frontline staff. We'll have a great culture, but that doesn't seem to include listening and engaging staff. I mean, such a fundamental missing part. And as already been raised, thank you, James, excellent point, women, children and young people. This has already been, we're going to do X. Where are their voices? It doesn't exist. And we've done this so quickly. Now, I do appreciate this has been set by government, clearly without much thought, care and attention to actually what goes into such a thing. And if we do manage to get all of these views and issues, will it change that much here? What guarantees do I have that actually this isn't going to just be tinkered with because it's been written on now and we'll just do a set of tinkering? I don't think it's the best of starts to a partnership that's supposed to be built on trust, because trust, frankly, though, Chair, is earned. It's not given just because someone writes in a document. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Vincent and colleagues, do you want to respond to a number of those points? Then I'll come to some more questions and comments.
Okay, I'll begin then. Thank you. Firstly, thank you for the comments and the input. And again, I think This is really valuable because actually, as we've emphasised several times, this is a starting point and work that we truly want to build on. I think just in response to the element around how we work together, certainly from my perspective, I think that as an integrated care system, we've made a step forward in the right direction by actually signalling that actually this is important to us, but equally important is not just to focus on the healthcare clinical services, but on how we actually work together on the wider determinants of health. Because clearly if we can do that and if we can be successful around that, then actually that focus on prevention will reduce the numbers of people who need to come into secondary healthcare services. But albeit that is also an important element. And so this strategy is absolutely predicated on how we work together with partners as a whole to actually focus on those wider determinants. And I know on the agenda for today's committee, we have other examples of how we can take that work forward together. So the symposium that we held in October was a really good opportunity to bring together over 140 leaders across our system who can influence the ways in which we work together and collaborate. And so from my perspective, I think that's a really strong example of how we start to build that trust by recognising the roles that we play, by recognising how we contribute towards tackling some of the issues that we know are really endemic in our local area and challenge our local populations. So that's a good starting point. And I hope that what the strategy does is give us really clear ambition around where we want to focus our energy, where we want to try and target some of the development work that we need to do, but also recognising that there is a lot of work going on already across our local partnerships at place and neighbourhood level. And actually what we want to do is to galvanise some of that and link it to being really clear about how we measure those outcomes that we need to deliver on, but also hold ourselves to account against how we do actually work together to improve on those outcomes. And some of those are starkly set out in this document in terms of where we find ourselves at the moment, in terms of life expectancy in some of our deprived areas of our population. And those are really important pillars that we want to focus on and emphasise how we can work together and build around. Welcome John's comments around just really thinking about how we define those outcomes, and indeed that is work that we have been discussing through the steering group as the next stage of this work. And again, we want to do that in partnership with our local health and care partnerships, our neighbourhoods, our districts and boroughs, because again it needs to be relevant to those local populations as opposed to setting those outcomes at scale across Kent and Medway. And we're committing to doing that work and really thinking through, with the knowledge and expertise of our public health colleagues, how do we make sure that we have a logic model that we follow around that, so that we can actually be really clear about where we would expect to see ourselves if we continue to focus on these areas over the next year, over the next 2 years, over the next 5 years. So absolutely accept that as an area that we want to have focus on, and to bring back to this committee the evidence of that work as we move towards developing the final iteration of the strategy. I'll start there, but I mean, I guess James and Andrew, and if there's points that you would want to add, please do so as well.
Thanks, Vincent. And again, just to double down on the points around the measures, John, we have really thought about that, and in terms of the actual structure, and clearly what we're not trying to do is to prejudge without going out and working with our stakeholders what the outcome should look like. We know what the final outcome should look like, of course, improved health, well-being, etc., fewer people dying when they shouldn't do, but the context as to the specific elements. We have got a logic model, and we're looking to engage into and go through that with colleagues.
Can I just take a few more? What I think, or Sedi, did you want to come back in response to some of those points, or do you want to contribute in the next batch? Happy to hand over to you at this moment.
All of the above, Roger.
All of the above, right. Well,
Thank
you have your first go now then.
Thank you. And I guess it's more of an observation, actually. And I mean, Shane, thank you very much for your comments and observations. From my perspective, and I'm sure from all of us here, they're welcomed. Because what we've started here and now has not been done before. It can't have been done before, because if it had have been, the information that we received, what we see with our own eyes across Kent and Medway, it would not be so. So we have a collective responsibility, I think, to move this agenda forward. It was interesting listening to some of the language around the table today. This cannot be a them versus us. This has to be a we. When we organised the symposium and we talked about starting a movement, it was a movement for everybody, where we have a collective appreciation of a vision that we've all signed up to. It's really important that this integrated care strategy is not something that will sit on the shelf. This will drive the thinking of every organisation, every community, every stakeholder group across Kent and Medway for the foreseeable future. So we were never going to get it right in the 3 months that we were given to deliver it. We were never going to engage as fully and with the authenticity that we need if we are going to build trust. And that word trust is really, really important. I agree with you. Trust is not given. It is earned, but it's not earned overnight either. It takes time. It requires all parties to listen. It requires all parties to be open and transparent, admit when they're wrong, be vulnerable as an institution, approach discussions with humility. Now, this is not a soapbox moment, but I'm sharing with you some of the discussions that I've had with Paul and colleagues around the ICB board table. At the recent Turn of the Tide meeting, I talked about heart versus head. And I think there has to be a really strong balance around this table of heart and head. We have to be motivated to make a difference. I think historically, we could all argue that different parts of our system have been motivated, understandably so. But we haven't come together in this way before. So for me, the context in which we're having this conversation is not one of an adversarial back and forth, dodging the metaphorical verbal bullets going back and forth across the room. This is about building something together. So, Roger, thank you for that time. I really wanted just to say that to give us, just to remind us what this is all about. It may not have been needed, but I wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sedi. I've got a few names. I've got Jane, I've got David, you'd indicated, Angela, Kevin, anyone else? Sorry, yes. Yeah. So do you want to go ahead? Sorry. Yes, please. Yeah, sorry.
I think actually it's a really useful starting point. I recognise the challenges in getting to this point, in the time that we had. So I genuinely think it's a useful starting point. I think one of the immediate challenges I see from a voluntary sector perspective is the reference throughout the document to prevention, early intervention, in a context where we are reducing funding to the voluntary sector, reducing funding into the community. So to give a very real example, within Kent last week, we hear that there's going to be a cut to early help grants. So £600,000 will be taken out of the pot that's available to community and voluntary sector organisations to be able to deliver the kinds of services that we're referencing here. And I think as soon as we circulate this to the voluntary sector, that will be the first thing that comes back, that there is a disconnect between what's being said here and what's being allocated in terms of resources in a time of, that we all acknowledge, huge financial pressures. So I just felt that's something we ought to raise and be aware of.
Thank you. Let's take David next.
Thank you very much, Chair. The point I wanted to raise was quite similar to the point that Jane has just raised, but more specifically with regards to children. And it is important that we give children the best start in life. That has been recognised for a long, long time, and in particular has been one of the key points of the health and wellbeing boards. We in Medway have been giving specific thought to where we are with children today and the children of the future when they go into adulthood. Because today we are seeing a lot of pressure on adult services. We're seeing a lot of pressures on the adult services budgets, and obviously the voluntary sector plays a big part in what we do with adults. But what has become very clear in the discussions between children and adult services within Medway, together with our Health and Wellbeing Board, and that is that the lack of investment for children and the lack of investment in children is in fact, or has led to where we are today with adult services. Despite all the cost of increasing care and care homes and all those sorts of things, we're looking at the basics of that transfer or transgression from being a child into adulthood, where they're coming into adulthood and they're not necessarily prepared for the life that they're going to be brought into. So we certainly have been believing and working very hard to see increased investment in the children's services, particularly with regard care and also mental health, children's mental health services, where if they could be headed off at the pass, we believe that the benefits are going to show in the years to come. This is not one of these projects that, well, you snap your fingers and here we are today and tomorrow it's all going to be fine. We recognise that we're going to be on a journey. And my personal view is that this could take probably 10 years before we really sort it out. But I think if we don't start now and keep putting it off year on year on year, all we're doing, in fact, is hurting the very people that we're trying to protect for the future, and that is the children and indeed the adult services. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, David. Let's take a couple more. Kevin, I think you'd indicated.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I want to sort of take something up from that John alluded to earlier on. I want to identify that this strategy document is very wide-ranging. It's picking up all the problems and difficulties and issues that there are across the sector. There are many people involved in that process, and there's the issue around funding as well, going forward, and resourcing. The key element for me, and I think it comes back to the element of trust, is that I think people are very keen to understand what are the priorities and how and when are we going to be able to get, and this is a question, how are we going to get to identifying those priorities, and how are we going to do it early enough? Because the problems are here with us now, aren't they? And how are we going to prioritize what is the most important issue to address? And the issue also is around resource. We have to get to that point fairly quickly. Do we identify that at primary care level, we're lack of doctors? Is that our first priority? And I don't see those priorities coming through in that strategy document. Now, it is the most complex bit, I understand, and I do understand it's an interim document. But my question is, how are we going to get to that point? Thank you.
Thank you. And Angela.
Thanks, Roger. When I read this, I thought skeleton, because there was a short time frame, so you've got to put a skeleton together, and as you go forward, you start adding the meat on the bones, and some of the meat on the bones would go further down to the HCPs anyway. My own two penneth was that I've just found the page, 28, taking some responsibility for your own health also requires information to be there, available to me. More data, more transparency on pathways. If my local council has to tell you how many times they're sweeping your street, I kind of think that I should know how long it's going to take me to get a scan. Well, actually, get a triage before I get a scan, and that sort of thing. And that's something that we have not been very good at. Well, it's in the book, Ange, if you want to look. Yeah, but that's me. What about all my residents? You know, we should have things, more information online, more well, if we were good at communication, we'd be billionaires, because every organisation I've been in say communication is a problem. We know this. But, you know, sometimes people don't want to keep bothering. I'm not talking Dr. Google, because that can be quite dangerous. But on the NHS website, you can get your choose and book times, days, you know, 42 days at this one, 100 days there. You choose and book. And I think the things that you might have, well, actually, I've got this problem. Oh, there's the pathway. Well, actually, it isn't too bad, yeah. I'm going to embark. I'm going to start on my journey by taking responsibility for my health and well-being. And if you don't give people the tools, then it's going to continue, got to watch what I say, and like a nanny state. Oh no, I need to see the GP. I think I might have a cough and cold. Taking responsibility, helping people take responsibility, means a two-way path that you've got to help them with. And I see this going forward as part of the meat. So whether on this particular skeleton or going down to the HCPs, well, how do we improve the health outcomes? What do the people in our areas need to go forward, either to contact a GP or a nurse or a this, that, the other, 111. But if you don't give people that information, we're just going to clog up the GP system or A&E ad infinitum. So I saw this as a good skeleton. But going forward, sorry, the other thing I also saw it as like the rolling register. You have it to start, but you continually adding bits in, and I'll perhaps take that little bit out. But you've got to start somewhere. So, yeah, and I get. I've always been a we, and then I think, oh, sorry, it's not me. We.
Thank you. Can I just ask if Vincent and colleagues, Vincent, James, Anjan, any responses to some of the other points that have been made, and then I think we'll move to a conclusion on this section. Actually, tell you what, I'll take it in the sort of reverse order. Take Anjan, James, and then Vincent. And if we can keep it relatively quick, because I want to stick to schedule if I can.
Yes, thank you. So just answering some of the points, there was this question raised about priorities. What are the priorities? How are we identifying them, and how will it be resourced? So that is the next stage of this process. That's the granularity. There's been a lot of work done. So we've actually pulled together all the relevant strategies and documents locally and nationally and regionally and at district level, and engaged the district councils and identified their own priorities which match into this strategy. Some of them are overtly health and well-being related, some of them are indirect but do relate to health and well-being. And from that, we have pulled together a priorities page. So it's not reflected in this strategy yet because we haven't done the discussion and finalization of that. But a lot of work already has happened, and that will continue. Just as another example, we have a workshop next month in January with the East Kent Health and Care Partnership, and that is to develop their prevention strategy. Their prevention plan, which is actually the action plan for what happens in the next 2 years, in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years. So that work is already started, and it will gain momentum, and you'll see that momentum. It'll become very visible in the last quarter of this financial year.
Thanks. And I think I'd reflect on the point that this is about the wider determinants and the actions that we need to take. Clearly, as Angela's already flagged, there are some specific things around clinical services and that type of thing. But I think if we're looking upstream and we're looking at where we are now, it's that investment in children, young people, the infrastructure, the economic well-being. Those are the broad, you know, we talked about anchor institutions and how we actually can create employment for local folk and embed that within our structures. I think if we can get that bit as well as all those other things, and GP Access, clearly we're going through that process at the moment, that is clearly a fundamental, and we've got to deal with that. But it is that broader thinking. It's that bit around building capacity and enabling folk to take responsibility where they can, but actually then having the space and scope within our systems to enable folk who aren't as able to do that to receive care and support. So I think it's just that other way of looking at this as a challenge. And I do get the point, Kevin, you took that place-based bit, as Unjan said, we are working on that, and that clearly is the issue that we will come to when we start bringing forward the action plans.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Unjan. So just from my perspective, finally, I think just to pick up the points about how do we also make sure that we are blending the work that we're currently doing with targeting those areas of our population where actually we know we've got the most vulnerable. So I do think it's important that we do also have a focus on how we use the data that we have available, so that population health management information. And I think we are blessed in Kent and Medway that actually some of the data that we've got is available at a neighbourhood level. So actually we can look at, when we look across our GP lists and registers, who are the most vulnerable, who are likely to need additional support, or we may want to target around that prevention work so that we can prevent their conditions deteriorating further, so that there is a need later on to come into contact with secondary services. So again, I think this is about a whole system approach and model, but also is about making sure that we can evidence the benefit of working together, the benefit of working in a different way over a longer period of time. And I think that's why this strategy is different for me. It isn't just about those healthcare services, it's importantly about those wider determinants and that focus on prevention. And so from that perspective, speaking from an NHS organisation, it's important that we play into it, but it's also important that we recognise it isn't just around the healthcare services that we currently deliver.
Thank you. I'm conscious that I've sort of given the thumbs down to a couple of people who've indicated they wanted to speak further, and I apologise for that, but I think we need to draw to a conclusion. If I could just, just picking up actually one point, Sally's point about particular reductions in funding, I think the reality is in the current environment, all of us actually will sometimes get pushed into things where there is a tension between some of the objectives we set, and how do we best seek to overcome that? I think it is partly about the way in which collectively we marshal our resources to try and set some of those priorities which we recognise, because all of us actually individually as organisations are constrained by a combination of limited resource on the one side and statutory requirements on the other. And trying to find your way between those is not an easy thing, but I think the point is well made, and I fear it will not be for the last time that those challenges arise in terms of that sort of tension. So I could just pick up one other point, which is, I think, in terms of how we take this forward, lots of challenges put, issues raised, I think all valid. Some of them will naturally plug in more to the action plan stage, and I think taking that forward is really, really important, because it's at that point that we actually shape what organisations, including my own, do in this space. Yes, as I said, we've got a period of several weeks and months in which we do seek to hone this and make it effective. So I think otherwise the only other point I was going to make was Sedi made reference to the symposium, and I think that was a tremendously successful event. We don't ever want to make those things routine, because once they become routine, they lose their life. But I think we do want every so often to be able to draw on that kind of spirit, because this involves lots of organisations and in some senses the whole population. The relationships in this are not hierarchical. We will only actually deliver on this if we do have a sense of shared purpose, which I think did come through from that day. And I think it's important that we sustain some of that, because it's the only way in which we will actually deliver this. So, good, right, thank you. Can I just come, we have a simple conclusion, which is that the partnership is asked to endorse or to approve this interim strategy. Is that agreed? Agreed. So I'm seeing a... Shane, do you wish to record?
I wish to record because, but on a governance point, Chair, I've got in writing here that we're not a decision-making body, so therefore it's only the statutory partners. I've got a paper that says it's for a decision, so it'd be good for clarity to what it actually is. If it's a decision-making body, then no, vote against, but if it's not, it's just for information.
Can I have advice? It's an interesting point. Can I have advice on that? Because clearly, in one sense, it is the statutory partners who approve. I think this is more intended as a kind of general declaration. But has anyone got advice on that particular point? Karen, I think, who's had a lot of involvement in this. If you don't mind just coming and setting us right on this one.
The agreement is that every statutory organisation involved and all the organisations involved here are sovereign bodies, so they can take back a decision to be made by their own organisations, which would supersede any decisions made here. So we're asking here for recommendation, approval and endorsement to take this back to our own organisations for approval. Where we've had slight challenges with that is timing, because the meetings and the governance around getting this through really quickly have kind of led us to go in the wrong order. In normal years, we'd seek your approval to recommend this to the sovereign bodies involved. So I hope that clarifies.
No, that does. That's very clear. Thank you. And I think, as you say, this year, and it plays into many of the points that have been made, this year a lot of things have been cart before horse in terms of how things are done, simply because of the frankly impossible timeline that this integrated care partnership, like others across the country, was set. So within that framework, the partnership is asked to approve this interim strategy. Do you still? Sorry? Okay, I think we can record that, I think there is a... Can we record that this is approved, but with the recorded dissent of Councillor Mockery-Cox? Unless anyone else wishes to. No. Okay, good. Thank you all very much. Right, we move on then to the engagement related to this strategy, and I think Matt is due to lead off on this.
I am indeed. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for your kind words about the symposium, which I think gave us a taste of what can be and the common purpose that you describe. And I just want to echo, in introducing this, what Sedi said about how this is not something we've done before. And actually, our experience of putting together this plan, which we have co-produced with the statutory partners, has been that although health has worked with local authorities in Kent and Medway forever and ever and ever, actually the level of understanding and co-working that you need to get to in order to work actually as one system is much deeper than we've been used to working before, and I think that's all for the good. So to briefly introduce this, because I think we're running slightly behind time, what this sets out is a programme for communications engagement over the next year, which will support not only the development, the future development of the integrated care system strategy, but is also designed to support the work that Medway Council will be doing on its joint health and wellbeing strategy and the work that Kent County Council will be doing on its public health plan. It will also give us, in the course of doing this work, insights which we will gladly share with partners, both statutory and voluntary sector and so on, about people of Kent and Medway and their health and well-being. It's a joint programme because I think that's the best way that we can avoid duplication, make the best use of resources, but also demonstrate that we're doing this together and that the health and well-being of the people of Kent and Medway is a common endeavour. It contains within the plan a particular push in January to March as we go up to the pre-election period. That is partly because a strong engagement push is needed for the next iteration of the integrated care strategy, but also, that's a good period in which to be working on that. Obviously, that needs to be sensitive to the fact it'll be cold and, people may not want to come out in person, but there are plenty of activities we can do wider than that. As well as the strategy that you've got in front of you, there will be a summary version of the strategy and other versions as well. So we're looking to produce an easy read version for people, as well as possibly some animations so that people find it very easy to understand. We're looking to reach all the communities in Kent and Medway, and I mean that geographically, but also looking to some of the communities that were mentioned when we were talking about the strategy, such as young people and their parents and carers, to hear their views. And one of the things I want to emphasise is, I think when you do a communication engagement exercise like this, it's quite easy to hear the obvious points. I can tell you, when we start talking to people more about health and well-being, they will say it's terribly difficult to get an appointment in primary care and they don't like the fact that ambulances wait outside hospitals. And that's important to hear, but it's also important to go deeper than that and to hear the things beyond that. And we will look to use the activities we've done to do that. We want this to be accessible, so there will be online elements of it, but there will also be elements in paper with things that people can take away. It will also include several in-person elements for people who want to come together, and it has evaluation built in. So all the way we go through it, we will know how well we're doing at both reaching people and hearing their views, and we'll be able to tailor the programme to go with that. In some of the work we did early on around this strategy, one of the comments that came back was that there's a lot in here. And I just want to tell you two things about that. The first of which is, for the ICB, it is the core of our engagement work for the next year. Outside of statutory consultation around service changes, this will be the core of our work, and that's what my team is dedicated to and we're putting resource towards. And while I know, of course, that the local authorities have other responsibilities than just health and well-being, naturally, I know it's a priority for both of the statutory partners as well. It's a comprehensive package. The other thing I'd say is, if we find that through limits of resource, whether that's people or time or money or senior time, then we can prioritise this. This is the comprehensive package. If we need to prioritise it, we can. But I think what the package says is that this is a really important piece of work to support the work that Vincent and his team have been doing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'll take a fairly brief round of comments on this given time, but Angela, Claire, I'll take, okay, fine, Angela.
Just a brief one, because you talked about stakeholders, blah, 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 blah. GPs and GP practices in there, in terms of the we, she's no longer practicing, but senior practice nurse said, Angela, at this time, my asthma clinic trebles. Now, actually, it's not for the NHS to look into that, but it is actually up to local authorities in terms of air quality and stuff like that. But if we don't know there's an issue, I mean, I know I can tell you what the answer is, but that's where the working together and the partnership. We're not asking for, Angela Harrison, Claire Bell, Roger Goff came in and said, just some broad data. so that we can, because if we don't know that there's issues out there, I'm not saying there was an issue, but that is where we can work in partners. So, but if you don't ask people and say, well, no, we do want to know, and this is what we're going to do with it, they'd be more inclined to come forward. But there are a lot of, if we ignore the housing issue with mould, there are a lot of respiratory issues that GPs deal with that actually local authorities could actually help with. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you, Angela. Now, I've seen Claire, I've seen Neil, I've seen Richard, and I'm going to guillotine it there because we are already behind time. But Claire, and then I'll come back to Matt at the end of that. Claire.
Thank you. I didn't get a chance to speak on the strategy, but just to say I think it's really visionary. Some would say perhaps utopian, and I have serious concerns about the lack of prioritisation in the action plan. And it is relevant to this agenda item because you commented that that piece of work is the next stage, so it's part of this comms and engagement strategy. But I have to say, as comprehensive as that all sounds, and roadshows and leaflets and easy read leaflets and all of that, fantastic to get the message out, but I am still struggling to understand where the actual engagement is coming from, and I include in that the role of this group, because I wasn't able to comment on the draft that was sent round because of the timescale it was sent in, and I am sitting here thinking, how do we actually input into this? How do we help tell you what it's like out there? Sally's already talked about the cuts to services. I think almost everybody would say that the strategy we could all sign up to and agree with the vision because it is so visionary. And I'm particularly pleased to see the comments about prevention and wider determinants of health because they are the things that will make the difference. But honestly, in all reality, are we going to see investment in those areas? Because you're going to want to see outcomes. You're going to want to see things quicker than that. And we're talking about long-term investment that has been missing for many years. And the situation that is out there for our communities, for their health and well-being is really dire. And as much as I support what this is aiming to do, I'm really struggling with that disconnect between how are we actually going to do it? What are we going to prioritise first? And where is the money coming from? So... And my concern is you'll do all this engagement, you have all these roadshows, and it won't get us any nearer. Everyone will agree, yes, of course we need to address these inequalities, etc. But how are we going to do that?
Thank you. Neil.
Thank you, Roger. Just to thank Matt for what is a comprehensive and thoughtful plan. Matt, thank you. Just to say also, I think it's implicit in your paper, but do make sure you use the communication engagement systems at the local level, so our health and care partnership. It is implicit there. And it then goes to the point that John made earlier. I guess the impact of that will be more meaningful if we are clearer on some of the priorities and impact. So there's an issue of timing. Do use the local health and care partnerships, but we need to understand what the priorities are locally, which will have more of a better engagement outcome. So it was more a request to tie in and align to our local communication. Roger, please.
Thank you. And Richard.
Thank you, Matt. Again, very comprehensive. I guess it was interesting when you opened the presentation, when you said that people just want to talk about GPs and ambulance waits, but we need to move on from that. I guess there'll be other things that people will say we'll want to move on to because they'll be the too hard to do pile. And I think sometimes we have to take the principle that we may need to do the too hard to do bit. If that's what people want to talk about and that's major concerns, then maybe that is the priority. So I know you didn't mean it in that way, but it is probably, because I think that's probably one bit that touches everybody really, all residents of Kent. And I think there's a plea as well that we do this in a timed way, and we also make sure that we're using the information we've already got. Because I think the last thing we need is to go out to populations again and say, what's important to you? We seem to be consistently doing that. And again, I couldn't see in here, it may be implicit, is that how we engage with the hard to reach to groups that we seem to oversee all the time, really. And I think maybe if there is some fertile ground, then we can work with those communities that don't naturally engage with statutory bodies, and that's a difficult bit for us to do. Thanks, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt, back to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll go through these briefly. I think, Angela, the example you give of the asthma piece is at the core of what this strategy and this engagement programme are looking to do. If you treat asthma just as a health complaint, then you miss the point, right? We can give them drugs, but actually, shouldn't we look at what causes the asthma in the first place? And that's, I think, the whole reason that we're here today, and certainly part of the reason that I'm working in the ICB. The question about where's the engagement going to come from? Clearly, we are at a point where resources are very constrained. Yeah? And for me, one of the key things about strategies and the engagement that underpins them is that they're about setting priorities in co-ownership with the people for whom those priorities are supposed to benefit. So I can't tell you what those priorities are now, but that is certainly part of what this process should be about, and that's part of why we need to do this engagement is to make sure that we're working with communities in order to get to that, and part of the way that we do that is through the voluntary and community sector, and that's, you know, you have reach to people that statutory authorities find, you know, very difficult to talk to, so I'm completely there with that. Neil, it may be too implicit in here, but local is everything. And you know, if we wind forward from 5 years' time, then what goes on at HCP level, at neighbourhood level, will be what we're talking about. You know, the place for an overall integrated care system strategy will be thin, and the place for care strategies in local will be much bigger, and that's very much the direction of travel. And you know, this is not a one-off piece of comms and engagement for now. This is setting out an intention of how we work in the future. Richard, if I gave the impression that we were moving on from GPs and ambulances, I apologise. It's what, you know, the reason people mention it is it's what matters to them. And it's absolutely something that needs to be cracked. What I think I was hoping to say was, as well as hearing that, which is really important, we need to be open to people saying other things to us which are maybe not as front of mind as the ambulances. You know, so, you know, very, very much on that. And then when we talk about hard to reach communities, it may again be too implicit, but for example, my team have done some work on pregnancy and women from ethnic minority communities in the last year, which has been a real eye-opener about the difference in the experience, and that sort of work and using, you know, community and voluntary groups to reach those sort of people is absolutely very important to this. And just before I finish, Chair, and thank you very much for the time, I'd like to say thank you to Shelley Whittaker, my colleague who led on the development of the plan. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll go straight to the recommendation, which is that the partnership or the joint committee is asked to approve the approach. Is that approved? Thank you all very much. Right, we have a brief break. We are actually now at the time when we should have been coming back from said break. So 10 minutes, I'm afraid, goes by the board. Grab it as quickly as you can, and we'll get back to the table and to business as quickly as we can. Thanks. including the chair of the ICB. Yeah. Right, if we could just get going. I'm going to swap the items round because Zena's just joined us. Welcome, Zena. So I think probably it makes more sense to give a moment to, I was going to say acclimatise, I don't know if that's quite right. But so we will come first to our item on housing, and particularly the role of Kent Housing Group and the links between housing and health and wellbeing. Delighted to welcome John Littlemore, veteran of this area and of Kent Housing Group and indeed of Maidstone Borough Council. John, shall I just go straight to you if that's okay?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to give a bit of background about Kent Housing Group, I think we've had a set of slides sent round to you, but you'll be pleased to hear I'm not going to walk through every slide on here, but I will touch on some of those. But if there's anything that comes out of that you've already looked at, then please ask questions. Kent Housing Group is a mature partnership. As it says, it's been in existence for over 20 years now. And I should emphasise it is Kent and Medway. It's not just Kent. It's made up of the 12 districts and Medway Council and also has representation from Kent County Council. It's a very well-respected organisation to the degree that the Department for Living and Up Homes and Communities regularly sends their personnel and Homes England as well. So there's a number of initiatives that are developed that are then fed back up through DULUC and both ways. So we're often involved in collaboration with DULUC or invited to attend meetings where policy is being developed. Just in terms of what we can contribute to this partnership and our role with health, I think we've known for many years, and in fact, if you look at the history of housing, it first started with many of the health initiatives and legislation that was passed in the 19th century and later. We know that poor housing, substandard housing, has a direct impact on people's ability, at a very early age, their health, their educational attainment, which in turn impacts on their job prospects, and we enter into this circle of despair where that means that they end up only being able to acquire substandard housing again. So if we can make an impact anywhere as a district council, as a local housing authority, then at least we can intervene at that substandard housing stage and try to break that circle at an early opportunity. And we've seen the impact. It's been mentioned by Angela earlier about the young child that died, where the coroner attributed that to the issue around mould in the property. And it's quite telling that there were a number of touch points that family engaged with both housing services and with health services, but there wasn't any joined up approach to that issue. And that's something that we at Kent Housing Group are determined to make a change to. In terms of its governance, the Kent Housing Group reports to the Kent Chief Officers Group. It has an executive board, of which I'm a member. It also has a number of subgroups that deliver much of the work that we do to improve our community. So there's a subgroup around homelessness, there's a subgroup around housing standards, there's also one that deals with health and social care. So a number of the initiatives that we develop, including the Kent and Medway housing strategy, which is a rather unique document in terms of that partnership arrangement, is delivered through those subgroups. And they have a broad reach in terms of it's not just housing professionals sat around the table there. We do involve both colleagues from health and other statutory agencies as well. That does enable us to deliver some unique projects, but I think also we as district councils, as I say, are very engaged in the issue around how we can impact on health and what we can do to work with health colleagues to make matters better for our communities. And one of the projects is highlighted in the slides, and that was around the work that we did in Medway, which is one of our most deprived areas. And it was a really interesting piece of work, quite fascinating, the journey that it took us on. It was funded by the West Kent Health and Care Partnership. And as you can imagine, we were doing quite a bit of work with ourselves and with the communities to identify what we considered to be the main issues there around health and well-being, the disparities. And as usual, we as professionals, we were sort of identifying the things that we thought were the main ones around obesity, around healthy eating and diabetes. And then talking, what was really interesting was when that engagement then with the community and what they were saying back to us and the challenge they were giving back to us led us down a very different path to what I think we would have started from. And four sort of main areas that the community fed back to us was around food insecurity, which was a high issue for them, money issues, particularly with the cost of living crisis, housing, as we've touched on, properties not in good condition, and safety, like community safety. So on the back of that, we have developed an exciting initiative around a community larder in Medway. We're also going to be doing more work around how we can intervene with some of these issues around poor housing. And these are all initiatives that can be extrapolated out and rolled out across Kent through Kent Housing Group, because Kent Housing Group is uniquely placed to do that kind of work. And we saw that more recently, particularly with the COVID, where Kent Housing Group was able to organise vaccinations for some of the most marginalised members of our communities, such as people who are street homeless, but also our gypsy and traveller community. But then later on, as part of the Contained Outbreak Management Fund, Kent Housing Group itself bid for, it was around £2.5 million worth of grant to be able to help people come out of the situation that where they had been impacted as COVID. And that was delivered through the organisation that we have in place across Kent, which wouldn't have been able to have been achieved if we hadn't had Kent Housing Group in place. We're quite acutely aware, as I said earlier, around the links between housing and health, and the nice guidance that was issued in March of this year, linking the issues around housing, homelessness and health, quite apparent. And we all have a common purpose around how we can engage and interject to try and prevent homelessness, but where it does occur, to make sure that we're giving people the best opportunities to come out of that situation. It is quite frightening, the increase in homelessness that has occurred this calendar year, and one of the slides captures that in terms of the numbers of households in temporary accommodation, which has increased significantly across Kent during this financial year. One of the projects that we've worked on, that we piloted in Maidstone, was around the use of data analytics and how you could use that to intervene at a much earlier stage to help people who might be at risk by looking at the characteristics that might cause that. We were able to demonstrate that there is real value in pursuing those sorts of initiatives, and we were able to prove the concept to the point now that it's being rolled out across Kent with the support of Kent County Council. But what you can do with that sort of data analytics is really exciting, and its application in so many different areas, including health, are opportunities that we're looking to exploit through that group and through Kent Housing Group. At a more granular level, we've been able to deliver within Maidstone a property called Trinity. It brings together our learnt knowledge from working together with health colleagues, and this was really around tackling street homelessness. What we've been able to achieve there is from a time 5 years ago where we had just under 50 entrenched rough sleepers to a position now where we've been able to sustain a 0 street count. We couldn't have done that if we hadn't had clinical services embedded within the outreach team that delivered that service. So we have mental health professionals that work within that team, deliver that support. We also have a clinical nurse that delivers support from in that team. And we've been able to use that model now and develop it further, as you'll see from the slides, to deliver what's called Trinity now, which is a project both that provides accommodation for people, but also delivers with community groups a whole range of activities. So there's from English classes for our Afghan colleagues that have come over as part of the Afghan refugee program are held there. We have from bumps to babes classes going on, and all sorts of initiatives with our local voluntary groups. So I guess the message is that Kent Housing Group is able and willing to work with your partnership we are developing how we're going to approach the issue around housing standards. It's a key topic for us. It's a key topic for government. Government's challenging us to deliver more on that, and that's what we intend to do. And to be able to do that in cooperation and in conjunction with the partnership and with health colleagues, I think we can really make an impact, which is something that we've not done properly before in that area of work. So thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to come to your partnership board and talk to you about the work of Kent Housing Group. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I think that was terrific, actually, so thank you very much. Angela.
Briefly, Chair, I read this last night, was not happy to see we were the highest on the temporary housing in Swell. 2 points. Number one, first of all, I thought, oh, Maidstone. But actual fact, those three areas of major concern to Shepway, if you translate that across all the deprived areas across Kent and Medway, I mean, I'm in a deprived area, those are the three that are in mine. Those are the three that are on most of the island's deprived areas, Milton and all. And I would take a bet that in the deprived areas across the other boroughs and districts and unitary, the same three apply. The second point was on the homelessness prevention and homelessness. You said you've got DLUC in with you, and that's great. I was getting the impression that because the boroughs and districts, and obviously the unitary, are doing some fantastic work on homelessness prevention, it's costing a lot of money. And I was getting the impression, perhaps I shouldn't ask it here in an open forum, but I was getting the impression that authorities were being asked to be a bit more picky about the people that they help. Is that a bit too blunt in this forum? Because the more people, there's a tariffy thing, the more people we help prevent being homeless, the more money the government gives us. It's costing them quite a bit of money because we're all doing a fantastic job. It's not preventing it completely, but we are all doing a fantastic job. Any comment?
Can I just suggest that I'll take two or three again, just in the interests of time and keeping the flow of things. I'll take comments and questions, then come back to you, John, sort of en bloc, if that's okay. I'd seen, actually, who else wants to contribute? I've seen Shane, you've indicated. Anyone else? Nope. Okay. Oh, Sedi, you did indicate. I'm so sorry. Yeah, but Shane and then Sedi.
Thanks, Chair, for that, and thank you, John, for the presentation. I think it touches on the resource issue. It's always all very well having a voice, and it's been a voice of 20 years, of course, though it's a forum. Ultimately, it has no governance structure, it has no legal responsibilities, powers, or anything. The strategy document is wonderful, but it's a voice. It's not it has no governance or powers behind it, or nor does it have the resources behind it. And I think that's where the challenge for this ICP comes in, about having your voice added to the mix here, is to actually say, well, we want to solve housing as a crisis. In my borough alone, we had 12,500 council homes. Now we're down to 5,500. We've got 2,500 people on the waiting list. If we want to sort those wider determinants of health, give me a couple £100 million and I'll build you a couple of council houses and estates to alleviate that. But that is it. If we want that, we need to have that voice needs to go without I've got your strategy in front of me when you mentioned it. The support, lobby and influence national policy reform to ensure the affordable housing across a range of tenures. That's great, but we need to have that, I suppose, as a collective voice to ensure that. I do also think, though, I feel a bit Emperor's New Clothes when you lot get awfully excited about data and dashboards and scorecards, and data analytics as being the sort of silver bullet to solve it all. I really feel Emperor's New Clothes here. It is not going to solve that. What's going to solve that, speaking to the other points, is resources and action on this. And it's going to come down ultimately to bricks in the ground and affordable tenures, not at below market rates, to make sure that we have housing suitable for the future. And it's not going to be necessarily a bit of a talking shop and a dashboard we can wave at government. And that's what it's going to require. So I think, how can we work with you to make sure that voice is amplified and ultimately it leads to resources and action?
and SETI.
Thank you very much. John, thank you. It's really good to see you here and to get a sense from an integrated care partnership perspective where housing sits. I think it's absolutely crucial that you remain an invited guest or member or whatever of this particular group, because it's really important. Having spoken over the past 6 months or so to many of our social prescribing colleagues out there, they feed back to me that one of the biggest issues that they take up is housing. And the opportunity for that clear line of sight between the work of social prescribers working in primary care, for example, and housing, I think is really important. Allocations policies, we understand how challenging they can be in terms of, with pressure on housing stock, is it possible to have people under-occupying in a way that allows a carer to live in, for example? Again, reducing pressure elsewhere within the system. The tragic death of our Ishak up in Rochdale, I think, has brought home to all of us the implications and the fallout that comes from poorly maintained housing, housing in disrepair. Poor housing costs the NHS £1.4 billion a year. So we have to work together. Housing has to play its part in order to alleviate some of that spend, so we can direct that in other areas of great need. So I welcome you here. Through you, Chair, can we maintain an open invitation to housing colleagues to be part of this group? Housing associations are anchor institutions. I'm very conscious that the regulator has housing associations in its sight at the moment. There's an awful lot of downward pressure in terms of improving customer care, customer relationships. We've had tragic stories where housing association tenants have lay dead in their flat for 2 years. So there's a challenge there around housing management, implications that fall right the way through to health and social care. I think working together with housing, we can alleviate many of these problems. So welcome, please come back.
Thank you. Could I suggest that actually, and John, you may wish to pick this up, because we are asked to discuss and agree the potential links and feedback mechanisms between the Integrated Care Partnership, that's us, and Kent Housing Group. I wonder whether there's a sort of framework we can look at on this where, I mean, you mentioned, for instance, the work around housing quality and where there are major initiatives that Kent Housing Group is seeking to bring forward, that particularly they are brought here as well, so that we can then have, as you said, you know, the other partners who are represented here can to some extent feed into that, see if there are elements of action from our constituent partners that would support that, because I think that's the only way in which we're going to add value. Clearly, in one sense, Kent Housing Group brings together many of the key people in that area anyway. But the question is, how can we add value? And that would be my immediate thought as to how best we do that. But John, can I hand the floor back to you?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to pick up on a couple of the points, I think the funding issues that you're referring to, what was the look at the homeless prevention grant formula, and what was being proposed did have some perverse incentives in there, particularly around being able to, being rewarded for sending people out of area, which into private rented market. Fortunately, the people that we were talking to at DULUC have taken a step back and have agreed to go back and revise that. So we wait to see what they come back with. In terms of some of the matters that you raised, Shane, I think one example is the Better Care Fund. That's real funding that's used to help people with their homes, adapt their homes. That there isn't I don't think we've got the dialogue right between ourselves and Health about how we use the Better Care Fund. You know, there's an example in here about helping you home. That's, you know, that's a real concrete example of when we use the Better Care Fund to residents' benefit. It helps us all, including the health service, in terms of helping people move out of hospital when it's appropriate to do so. Data analytics, yes, I must admit I was a bit of a skeptic when it was first proposed to us. But the proof of concept was that we ended up being able to demonstrate, because we ended up with a control group, that of those people who were not assisted through that data analytics process, 20% of those ended up in temporary accommodation, where of those that there was an intervention, only 0.9% ended up in temporary accommodation. So yes, I can understand why it may feel like just ethereal, but it does have real results and a real benefit for people. And just finally, I absolutely agree with you. What we need to do as a nation is to be able to go back to actually encouraging local authorities to build affordable, good housing. And the way to do that is through a capital subsidy, and not the revenue subsidy that's been tried for the last 20 years, but has failed to produce the numbers of housing that we will need. So yes, any assistance you can give us in lobbying government to do that would be greatly welcomed. Thank you.
Thank you. And can I suggest then, as you say, that we will work on a basis that there would be an expectation that, with a certain regularity, that you or a KHG representative would come back here, but also, as I say, my suggestion about plugging it into major proposals, initiatives, areas of work by KHG, because then we can sense check it is the wrong term. We can check it against how the rest of us or the bodies represented here and this group can actually contribute and help.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, absolutely welcome that opportunity.
Good, thank you. And I suggest there may also be, the Better Care Fund is a little bit of an obsession of mine. And I think probably offline it might be worth reviewing, because I know there's a lot of work going on in trying to ensure that the Better Care Fund delivers better what it is supposed to. So perhaps picking up some of those housing elements outside here might be a good idea as well, I suggest. Right. Can we take it then? I think we've discussed and agreed the potential links, feedback mechanisms, etc. Everyone content? Good. John, thank you. Much appreciated. Right, we move on to our final substantive item, which relates to the cost of living crisis, which you'll recall we discussed at our previous meeting. Delighted to welcome Zena Cook, Section 151 Officer at Kent County Council. And Zena, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm working on the basis that the paper has been read, but happy to do a very brief summary and then take questions if that's helpful, conscious that you will have been here for a little while. So this paper is really intended to raise awareness of the programme that we currently have at Kent County Council, working with all our colleagues in districts and boroughs and a range of others from the voluntary sector and other parts of the public sector. The financial hardship programme was originally set up in response to the financial hardship either already being experienced or at risk of being experienced as a result of COVID. So it's been around for a little while. However, as we all know, the cost of living crisis that we're now seeing meant that there was, I think, a desire within the County Council to ensure that the work that we had started was able to be continued, albeit for a slightly different purpose. Some of the people are the same, but certainly we're seeing different cohorts of individuals being affected by the cost of living crisis in a way that perhaps they weren't when we were dealing with individuals through COVID. In effect, from a financial perspective, the leader of the council and the administration agreed to set aside a sum of money that was unring-fenced grant, and for that to be set up as a reserve to respond to COVID and the cost of living crisis. That reserve is still there, and it is earmarked to respond to the cost of living crisis through a range of interventions. Following that, it was actually announced, I think, possibly about 6 or 8 weeks before the government announced the first, what now is called the Household Support Fund, which was the Winter Grant Scheme, and that was again intended to provide financial assistance to those who were most affected. There was within that an expectation that local authorities would provide funding for free school meals outside of the school term, and we as a county council with partners have continued to do that with the subsequent tranches of funding that we've had from government. The Household Support Fund has very strict criteria, and we are required to spend it in particular ways, whether that be in relation to energy or utility costs. A certain proportion has to be spent with families who have children, a certain proportion with single households, etc. We make sure that we maximise that spend, and we work very closely with district colleagues and with the voluntary sector to provide direct support to individuals and households. The paper also sets out a range of projects. I think it's fair to say that the emphasis has been to use the funding to have maximum impact without creating, as far as possible, an ongoing dependency because of the fact that this is not recurring funding. So a lot of the money has been invested in areas where there are perceived gaps, that if it's possible to demonstrate the benefit and the return on the investment, that they may lead to longer term discussions around funding being found for those, and also areas where we know the actual impact of the project. I think John's example of data analytics and data sharing, if you look at the reference to the Zantura project, actually being able to identify people early and to avoid cost, and where we can demonstrate that that is the case, is something that we're really keen to do. So the County Council agreed to fund entirely that, that project, so that districts, given the financial situation that our district colleagues are in, would not have to fund that, and that's been funded for a 2-year period with formal evaluation throughout. Most of these schemes have been developed with and through the Task and Finish group, which has representatives from across the county and from a range of organisations, and they are generally based on evidence and research of either national or local relevance. So the areas like money and mental health, the underwritten loan scheme, these are all based on analysis and research that was done where there was an identification of gaps that people were falling through. The other point that I would make before coming to questions is the number of individuals who had never required support prior to COVID, and so it was a very different set of requirements. So there were those who were already known to us and had been known to us for some time in terms of their financial circumstances, but there were significant numbers of those who had never been or had never been required to need assistance from either the local authority or other partner agencies, who simply didn't know how to navigate the system, as it were. And that's one of the reasons why the project that's known as Refer Kent has been developed and established, to make sure that people aren't just signposted and expected to find their way, but they are actively and proactively referred and then contacted to ensure that they receive the help. I'll leave it there if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you very much, Zena. James, I know we spoke about this earlier, did you want to add anything from a Medway perspective on this issue generally?
Thanks, Chair. Just very briefly, all of the initiatives that Zena sort of set out for Kent, you can just accept that in terms of Medway, we're delivering similar programmes in relation to that need. I did want to just touch very briefly on the data and analytic point, if I might. We've been able to use our tools to really refine and understand what bits of our system, which bits of our population within Medway are really going to be more vulnerable due to the cost of living impacts. And we've pulled together an indices, and it might be helpful. I'm pretty sure it'll be similar to the Xanta scheme, but we've identified a number of key variables. Household energy ratings, and of course we're in a big old building here and it takes quite a lot of energy to heat it up, so if you've got a house that it's warm, we just got to get it. Yeah, basic things, access food, using the usual indices, so we've been able to map out the indices of multiple deprivation, fuel poverty. Age is a factor as well, because you're on a fixed income, aren't you? So if you're over 65, in general terms, you might have an issue there. Issues around chronic long-term conditions, and in particular when we're looking at our disease states, because these people potentially have got heart disease, constructive pulmonary disease, that type of thing, depression, you may well be more vulnerable. Income, lower income brackets, you're more likely to suffer in these, and then dependent children and live births, because clearly if you're a family and you've got to put food on the table, then that makes more of a challenge. So what we've been able to do is to look at this at LSOA level, so lower super output level, and we've mapped out one being the most deprived area and 163 being the least deprived LSOA in Medway. And that enables us then to really drill down and then understand how we can work and really triangulate some of that support into those areas. So I do hear what you're saying, Shane, in relation to data, but it's actually applying that data into practice, because we're then using that for our frontline services to understand where the need is arising and how better to support colleagues. So just to reaffirm the points that Zena raised around using data and intelligence so we can be a bit smarter with our interventions. That's all I want to say, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Any comments or questions? Sedi.
Just very, very quickly. Clearly, this should be, and I hope will be, an ongoing discussion around this table. We understand the challenges that we currently face across our communities around the cost of living, but arguably the increased use of food banks over many years had not just started with the cost of living crisis. There is a significant crisis across our communities around poverty, workless, and so on and so forth. So it's really important, I think, for this joint committee to really focus on that, because it does drive health and well-being for millions of, 1.9 million people across Kent and Medway. So I would ask again, in terms of, as this joint committee continues its work, clearly the focus on the strategy, we get that, but we've got to think about how do we continue being influential in shaping the future for Kent and Medway. And I think this has to be an ongoing item that we come back to again and again and again. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I agree with that. I think one of the challenges is that what we have, or much of what is described here, and much of what, certainly from our point of view, County Council, I'm sure it'll be true for Medway as well, much of what we started doing in this space was in response to a specific crisis, and clearly making much use of specific government grants. And household support grant is now the main vehicle for this. And we have, it has always felt as though the crisis is there and getting through it and to a slightly different situation is just around the corner. And first it was COVID, and then it was the cost of living crisis as represented by the inflation that we saw, the supply chain led inflation that we saw in sort of 2021 into early 2022. And now it's become an ever more intense one, linked now also to winter conditions, linked to fuel in particular. And so at each stage, it has gone on. Now, at some point, one assumes, we will actually reach something closer to an equilibrium, which does not mean that these issues will go away. But I suspect the large one-off grants will. And so the areas in which we're trying to, and again, I'm speaking here from a KCC perspective, but same I think is true of Medway, and trying to, and indeed what is done with district colleagues, etc., is trying to build a little bit more for the longer term, ways in which we can actually support particularly our most vulnerable residents, making best use of all the resources that the public sector has. So I think reporting back here intermittently on that basis, and then seeing how, again, that plugs into particularly the work of health partners, I think would be the logical way to think about this. But any other comments or questions on this? Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. One of the big concerns that comes through from my particular area is the issue around we are talking about improving the opportunities for people at the lowest socioeconomic groups. Now, where there is also a problem is where people perceive at the higher level of socioeconomic groups that their quality of service is being reduced. And one of the things that I've been observing in relation to our discussions, we have to be very careful that we don't level down but we level up. And I know that's a challenge within the resource, but I think it's something that we would need to be aware of when taking strategy forward. Because I note that a lot of our discussion is around the most deprived, and quite rightly so. But I think we have to be very careful on that. It's just a note of warning on that.
Yeah, and I think that is always, as I said, it's one of the challenges we all face in terms of how we allocate our resources, but it's a very, very fair point. James, and I've seen Angela. James.
Thanks, Chair. And great point. The principles that we try and use is, it's the Marmot principles where we actually provide more support for people who might need that levelling up bit, but we also then make sure that people, whichever stage and wherever they are, because their needs might be slightly different, do receive the appropriate support that they need, but we try to make sure that there is a balance, so you don't just focus on one particular group and ignore everything else. So the points you made are really well valued, but that's part of the principles that we're trying to utilise within the delivery of the integrated care strategy.
Thank you. And Angela. What was Angela? Yes.
Thanks, Chair. I was just looking to see if the name jumped out at me, but it doesn't. A number of us across Kent get an email from, I think it's something to do with Kent County Council CIC support. Anyway, and there's a map that you can go on and click on to see what help's available. And I forwarded it to, and as they update, I forwarded it to Mike Gilbert, and he said that he would pass it on to health colleagues, because it is, it is residents in our communities, or some of those residents in our communities work in the health service. And, it's a shame. But anyway, spread it as far and wide as we can. And I think it gets updated about once a week, but I've forwarded it on to Mike, and he's pinging it round to.
Very good, and thank you for that, Angela. And I think a key principle, for all of us, has been to ensure, I was bang on about two things in this. One is that we do not have people fall down the cracks between organisations, and that's what Refer Kent in particular is designed to address. And the second is that people are aware of the help that is available, because there is quite a lot out there. We would always want to do more, but there is quite a lot. One of the risks very often, and I think particularly if we think of particularly vulnerable people at this time with the temperatures we now see, still worried about turning on their heating, and we'd want to make sure that people are entirely aware of what help is available, because otherwise the consequences can be very, very serious. Now, I've seen Shane, and then I've seen Zena, I think you were indicating as well. I'll come back to you to draw this to a close in any case. So Shane, then Zena, and then we'll draw this one to a close.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very brief one. We've got some very interesting projects that are here, but access to them is also equally as important. We live in a very diverse county, a very expensive county to move around in, and having these projects, be it children, young people, pensioners, no matter where we have that, actually getting to these places, if it costs you a fortune to get to access these services, or you cannot due to transport issues, then some of it seems to be a missing part to do with removing barriers and access in this paper. I'm wondering maybe if the 151 officer can comment on how we're talking about removing those barriers to participation in regards to this, because otherwise some of these will matter little if they actually can't get to them.
Thank you. So, Zena, do you want to pick up that, and indeed any of the other points that have been made?
So I think the short answer to the point is that the majority of the projects are either delivered directly to individuals in their homes, either directly or via a trusted source, so whether it's a voluntary sector agency that they're working with, or whether it's a partner agency. We also do have both face-to-face and online access. One of the other ways of doing it is we have it's called the Professionals Referral Scheme, but basically whether it's somebody who works in housing or somebody who's a health visitor, etc., who can then put people in touch, because I think you're absolutely right. This isn't about being a sort of buildings-based kind of come and talk to us. It's where, for example, the bed poverty scheme, that's where we are advised, people are made aware that there are families, whether that's through social care staff or housing staff or others, who have young children and actually don't have enough beds for their children. So we organise and arrange for those beds to be delivered to those homes. So a lot of this is quite practical and financial, but it's supported by, for example, joint projects with people like Citizens Advice, who can deal with individuals on the phone or through their own local surgeries, because we've tried deliberately to make sure that there's a combination of county-wide provision, but also then very targeted local provision, because otherwise, as you say, the access becomes a barrier in itself, and therefore we won't achieve what we need to. I think just picking up on the general point, from my perspective, although it does say to note the report, I think there is an ask of sort of more active and more join up with health colleagues, because I think what I would say is if I look at the front sheet that you have about what particular area the report supports, I think there is a direct link between what we're doing through this programme and the beneficial impacts for particularly GPs and primary care. Refer Kent is a really simple example, but also some of the data analytics. So just in the last 12 months, the number of people who have been supported to, for example, claim pension credit that they're entirely entitled to, is in the hundreds of thousands of pounds. So we've got older people who can't find, additional funding through employment because they're retired, but actually are now receiving significant sums of additional funding that they were entitled to, and that's as a result of some of the projects that we've been doing over the last 12 months. The reason I mention that is because some of the work and some of the analysis that we've done is that those in financial hardship, and it is a generalisation, but do tend to use primary care services more for a number of reasons. And what we're finding is by identifying those who are then financially assisted, that additional relatively small sums of money is making quite a significant difference to those individuals. So, we know that there are, at least nationally, about 1 million pensioners who are what is known as asset rich and cash poor. So their houses are worth a fortune and they're living on perhaps 90 or 100 pounds a week. So that's just really one very simple example, and we've done some similar things with families. But I do think there's an opportunity here, whilst we do have, albeit time limited funding, for the local authorities to work with health sort of proactively and identify where, through that sort of data and analytics, where there are business cases to be made for joint investment, because actually the benefit and the impact will be within the health service. So I think that was really the point I wanted to close at as an ask, really. Thank you.
Thank you. And Paul is responding to that.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Zena. Can we take that away but make the commitment here that NHS Kent and Medway will come back to Zena with the right person and make sure that we balance up the ticket, as it were?
Thank you very much, and I think that's a good case, actually, of how we do add value by joining up our activities. So, great, thank you. Otherwise, asked to note, so noted, I trust. Otherwise, we move on simply to the forward planner, which is currently under review, but in the meantime, please, members are invited to, as I think it's set out in the agenda, there is an email or clearly contacting members of the team in terms of proposals for items for the next meeting. Finally, is there any other business? There is none. Then 2 minutes ahead of schedule. Delighted to close. Thank you all very much indeed.